I'm Chris Bishop and welcome to the Entrepreneurial Edge here in Dubai. I'm with an entrepreneur by the name of Gaurav Biswas, and now he's the creator and CEO of a company called TruKKer. It's like a sort of truck hailing company, if you can imagine that one. So he's starting to expand, and he's making his first foray into the African continent, and he's here to tell us not only how he financed the company, how he came up with the idea, and also a bit about his background. So thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Chris, for having me.
Just tell me, how you started out in life, where you're from, your parents, what were your early influences in life?
Sure. So I am born and brought up in India, in a place called Ahmedabad. It's northwest of Bombay, the international city that everybody knows. So I was born in a fairly affluent family. I'm the only son, pretty well provided throughout my childhood. I finished my engineering in Ahmedabad in construction, and then I went to study to the UK. Passed out from Edinburgh, worked in London for a few years, and so I worked in consulting for almost 12 years. So moved with my company from the UK to Dubai in 2007, right in the boom days of Dubai. Was very close to the real estate that was happening here. And then I remained in consulting until 2016 is when TruKKer was born.
But when you started out, before you came up with the business, what sort of jobs were you doing as this consulting engineer? Where would you be dispatched off to learn your trade?
So I had a very interesting working life, and sometimes I really miss it even now. So I used to, my forte was construction delivery of large mega projects. So I was moved to Dubai for the Atlantis in 2007. So that was, a trophy project going around anywhere in the world. And then I moved on to do a few other mega projects, the Yas Mall, which was an award-winning mall in Abu Dhabi. And the last one that I did before I got out of consulting was the world's largest indoor theme park in Abu Dhabi, Warner Brothers. So yeah, it was a very fulfilling career. I've moved across a few places and was very satisfied with where I was at that time.
So you worked on the sort of projects that you could tell your grandchildren about one day.
Absolutely. Like I'd take my daughter to Warner Brothers and I was like, hey, you know what? Papa was looking at these drawings when they were...
So why then? You were happy? You were fulfilled? Why did you decide to become an entrepreneur all of a sudden?
To be honest, there was no plan. It wasn't planned. I wasn't looking to, get into technology, startups and things like that. But there was a certain element of pressure for me to go and join the family business back in India. And I had like 12, 13 years of expat life. And so it was like, hey, listen, you need to come home. So there was that was the only thing that I was, psychologically looking towards in terms of, hey, listen, at some point I need to start planning something. But then this TruKKer was born on a dinner table. So, we were having a meal with a few friends. We were on holiday. A very good friend of my fertilizer manufacturer in India, he was having trouble with dispatching trucks the next day. And he had to walk out of the restaurant and he was shouting on somebody on the phone. And when he came back, I was like, hey, listen, what's wrong? He said, my trucks, tomorrow I'm going to miss this. And so it was a hazard for a business. So I just candidly was like, hey, listen, there should be an Uber for trucks. And somehow, I think that stayed with me for just a few hours because next day I called Pradeep. So Pradeep is the co-founder, and he's a childhood buddy. So we studied together since we were 8 years old. We used to go to each other's house. Our moms know each other. They'll call each other to check on the other guy. So Pradeep went into technology after school, and I went into construction. So I called him up and said, hey, listen, how easy or difficult it is to have an Uber kind of technology. So we met up over coffee, and a month from that time, we registered TruKKer. So I think it was all about, I was 35, I was like, hey, listen, if not now, then when? The world was very hot around startups and how technology is being used to disrupt conventional processes. So I was like, man, this sounds like an idea, a bit of Google research on trucking, but have no background in logistics or trucking or supply chain. This was purely a need that I saw in the market. I jumped on it.
So how did you get the capital together for that first step?
Financially, I was reasonably secure in life. I think money was not really something that would have kept us away from trying it out. Obviously, the scale would require investments, but so when we figured out that, hey, listen, this is what is required to be done, there needs to be a minimum scale of trying out this much. So we had that. Financially, that wasn't the worry. So getting it quickly started, and I think intrinsically as a person, I'm very impatient. It's like, hey, listen, I'm going to give up my job, but then I want to start seeing something in a few months. I'm not somebody who's going to wait a year and see, okay, now what have I created? So we moved very fast. That was the thing, and we invested, quite an amount of money before we raised outside capital.
So, if I remember rightly, you said something like $400,000 or something you started with.
Yeah, that was the kind of money that we had to invest to get the first, investor on board. And we were lucky. I think we had some fantastic investors who came and joined TruKKer very early on.
What sort of, bearing in mind you actually hadn't done anything at that stage, how did you convince people to put their hard-earned cash up behind you?
Well, when I talk about TruKKer, you realize that what we are doing is no rocket science. I think whatever we're doing has nothing about, creating we're not trying to create hair, so it's what we're doing is pretty basic. It's nothing. I don't find that lack of trucking experience is stopping me from doing anything. In fact, I think it's better because there are lots of things that we think about which a trucking guy is not thinking about because he feels, no, this is the norm. So a lot of out-of-box thinking happens because of that. So I think investors, when you tell them a story and it makes logical sense and you tell them this is how I plan to do and try to keep it simple, don't try to show them what is going to happen in 10 years time. Tell them this is what it is and this is the amount of data. And the good thing about us having invested our own money was that made it that much easier because we'd already started selling to willing customers without having any investors' money. So there was traction that we already demonstrated. And I think that's one of the important things that startups probably, or entrepreneurs should think of, that if you have the funds, then demonstrate risking your money first. Because if I have to invest in somebody's business, I'll actually question that, hey, why is he not risking his own money first? Why does he want to raise money while he might be able to invest it himself? I think that's one of the important things also,
So those first steps, just give us an idea as well. As I said, a lot of people watching are entrepreneurs.
Sure.
Your premises, your people, and your capital equipment. What did you actually get for that first day of operation?
We got the proof of concept done. So I think that was most important. We have an idea. We feel we can disrupt or use technology to modernize, digitize, whatever you want to call it, traditional processes. And this is how I can reduce inefficiency, and this is how I can make a margin, or I can create a value for somebody who will pay for. I think if you can just do the proof of concept of that with your own money, I think that's what we did. We got to a point where we established that, hey, listen, our product can sell. It does add value to an X number of boxes. And trucking as an industry, I feel it's still very, very early stages, extremely primitive as an industry. I come from construction, where people feel that, hey, construction is very traditional, is, behind other industries. But in 2015-16, construction was doing, 3D coordinated documents, advanced modeling. Trucking, if you want to move something from Dubai to Riyadh and just cross one national boundary, you're probably getting 6 or 7 different people involved to create documents which have to be taken in paper to pass through customs, and it's much more primitive. So the opportunity in trucking is way higher. And I think that we're just about getting started.
Yeah, because particularly, we're going to talk in the second half about your first foray into Africa. But in Africa, I know I've written many stories on it. Not only the bureaucracy at the border, you've also got poor roads sometimes. Sometimes you have police who can be a problem. You have port officials who can be a problem. There's all kinds of things that you face. Surely it's a very, in many ways, unpredictable business that you've gone into.
That's true. I think there are multiple, micro and macro challenges. I think that trucking generally has. And so the way, the approach that we take is that, hey, listen, I can't, if assets in this country or in this geography are 30% underutilized, I'm not going to make them 0% overnight. But hey, how do I reduce the 30% to 25% first? TruKKer, as we're gaining scale, we are doing multiple things. We are trying to approach regulators. We're trying to approach policymakers and say, listen, have you thought of this? If you think of upgrading the infrastructure by this much amount, your trucks might be doing 9 hours of driving instead of 4 hours of driving in a day. Once they get to 9, we'll say, listen, do you know, in this part of the world, trucks actually drive 20 hours a day, So that is something that we're now starting to do from a high level, and then our business is very on ground.
From scratch, how did you build up your market? How did you get people to suddenly just get this app on their phone and start logging in? How did you do that?
Well, first, I think because I did not come from the technology startup sector, I think a lot of this was very good learning for us, where I didn't realize that how powerful is Google. You don't think of when you're searching for something, and there is a business that's paying to come on the top of it, the search list, and how does that business pay Google and make returns? So a lot of these things, the digital marketing is something that we used aggressively in the beginning, where we were selling to a lot of B2C customers. As we started creating a brand, we then moved towards B2B. So B2C was used as a stepping stone that, hey, listen, this is going to create enough traction amongst drivers that this company gives a lot of jobs, and then one driver will talk to 10, and 10 will talk to another 10, and that's how we grew. So the supply side is a function of how much jobs you give. The client side is traditional, B2B, you'll have to have a sales guy, give a presentation, talk about what values he add, understand what the pricing expectations of the clients are. But B2C is a function of digital marketing. Google, Facebook, Instagram.
So you didn't do any marketing at all, really?
We did a lot of the digital marketing.
Digital marketing, but not traditional going out and seeing people. So largely like other hailing companies that you've mentioned, it was like word of mouth.
A lot of it is word of mouth, and I think that only keeps getting better. As you gain traction, like we're now, going live in Egypt, and we feel there's a huge amount of the market in Egypt that already knows us to be active business in Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman. So they are already, our entry is as a much more credible and established player in the Egyptian market who's already done this rightly in a few other markets.
Well, give me an idea of growth. I mean, you kicked off in 2016, give me an idea of, from your first customer, how quickly it grew.
So the beginnings are always more difficult, and I feel that, me having said that and being 3 years into TruKKer, I think we are still at the very beginning. You can't imagine how much more difficult it is for us than a global, recognized brand to go and sell your product. But the smaller you are, that's astronomically more difficult. So I remember the first B2B client, it took us about, 5 meetings to go and talk to him. So everybody would first question that, the technology is all great, we love that, but can you reliably deploy trucks? Because you don't own any trucks, and you're saying, I guarantee truck availability. So that was a big challenge, but then we feel now that stage is gone. We are not challenged for, people know that, hey, this is a reliable, we move hundreds of trucks every day, and people know that from, like we have clients who are not our clients, but when they can't get through their contracted supplier, they would come ad hoc and get a truck from TruKKer. So I think that's how I think it has evolved, but the first client was quite hard.
Well, just one last thought just before we go to the break here. So if I have a trucking company, I can stand outside if I have your app and a truck will come down the road. How long will it take?
Well, the real-time element of trucking is very different from cabs. I think that's where, you can walk out of the interview here and get a cab. Trucking is much more planned. So I think that element is slightly misunderstood when people compare truck aggregation with cab aggregation. Trucking requires way more planning anyways. Your client has to prepare those documents to give you to go with the truck. So they know the dispatch information pretty much a day earlier. For us, what we're doing is we're making this whole information much more transparent. So TruKKer as a network is if you can't find a truck on TruKKer, that means there are no trucks in the market. But if you have the information, I need 10 trucks tomorrow, 5 day after, 20 day after, then you must be able to securely say, yeah, TruKKer's got it covered. If the bookings are taken, that means there's a truck already allocated for your job. So
now you're making your first foray onto the African continent. How did it come about, and what do you plan to do there?
So Egypt has been a focus area for us for quite some time. We've been studying Egypt for now more than a year. And we've also, built a strong network of potential clients, other businesses that would like to start working with TruKKer, as we start there. So Africa as a continent, I think, does a lot of trade with the Middle East. We, as a trucking company, are focusing on everywhere throughout the GCC, all the way to Turkey, including Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and then, Egypt is where I think we're going to come in towards the Gulf. And so Egypt as a market itself is, you can't be in Middle East and North Africa and not be in Egypt. It's pretty much as important as Saudi Arabia. So Egypt for us was where we see a lot of domestic consumption of trucking, where a lot of cargo moves within the country. And I think there's a lot of fresh produce that moves out of Egypt to regional countries, into Jordan or southwards into Saudi Arabia. And vice versa, there's construction equipment, petrochemicals that are moving from Saudi Arabia into Egypt. So for us, Egypt opens up both these markets. Our network of cross-border trucking is our biggest product, and we have a lot of clients who are moving cargo into Egypt. I think it only makes sense for us to create that network where we help the same transporter. So for us, the cargo owner and the truck driver are both our clients. So as much as I want to move your cargo securely, I want to focus on making sure that you keep getting regular jobs. So in fact, one of the principles of our business model is to impact the dead load, which is a legacy problem in trucking. And that's why I think earlier in our chat today, I said it's not what we're doing is nothing rocket science. I think if we just focus on that one problem of dead load, which is a legacy trucking issue throughout the world, where lots of trucks move empty, I think that's the way we would crack any market. But Egypt is a function for us to have that for our clients of moving cargo into Egypt. And then once we are there, we're going to focus a lot on the port movements. Egypt is a big trader. That's very active ports, I think, on both the coasts of Egypt. So we're very excited. We just recently announced our regional director for North Africa and Levant countries. So we're very quickly building a team there.
From your research, then, it seems that Egypt's one of the places to be in Africa. But what were the risks you also identified in Egypt?
I think Egypt has risks that are very similar to any kind of young, high potential but still maturing kind of economy. So I think there's a lot of potential. Lots of people want to get into the job market. There's a technology penetration is quite high. Education levels are above average, and there is the country being young also has a lot of energy. So I think Egypt has a lot of these, but because it has recently gone through instability politically, it also had some commercial economical instability with the currency rate. I think there's some of these things that will settle down, and if they if the stability of the country remains, I think Egypt is one of the highest potential economies we see in this part of the world.
What are the problems in your business in general, wherever you operate? What are you finding?
I would say the biggest problem and that is also the biggest opportunity, is the fragmentation. There are, if you see trucking generally as a business, the biggest fleets, when I say biggest fleets, maybe a company with 2,000 trucks is probably the biggest trucking fleet in the region. And the regional industry of trucking is into $60 billion if you add North Africa, Middle East. And in a market of that size, the biggest fleet is only 2,000 trucks or somewhere around that number, makes the market extremely fragmented. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, but that's also an opportunity for an aggregator to pretty much combine all of that and create performance standards and make them one gang of fragmented suppliers. The other problem with trucking is documentation. I think the documentation in this industry is extremely primitive, where people are talking about blockchain, and there are some companies that are probably still faxing a gate pass. You know what I mean? So that is a huge, I think, opportunity again. If you can crack the document processing and digitize that part of it, you build an immense, competitive advantage just in your own processes. So that's the other challenge and also an opportunity.
Yeah, okay. And looking towards the rest of the continent, you say you've got a 3 to 5 year plan for the future. What other countries do you think you might be looking at, do you think?
Well, we're very excited about throughout the Arab world, and we want to see how we can integrate Turkey as a major, economy that is exchanging goods and services with here. And, we go all the way towards Iraq, and then Egypt is our gateway into Africa. So definitely I think that geography is quite big enough. The Arab countries in the GCC, Saudi Arabia is probably our biggest market, apart from, the other regional Arab countries. So I think for us, we right now want to focus on these economies in the next 3 years. And beyond that, I think trucking as a service will integrate with sea freight, with air freight, and then your play becomes global. I think as long as you can handle somebody's cargo movement anywhere across the world, and then you have to integrate with multiple players. It's probably naive for somebody to create one global, player which is integrated into trucking throughout the world. I think that's very hard to do given how big the industry is. But there can be a lot of regional champions who then start collaborating or consolidating.
Would you ever consider consolidating the Middle East with Africa, like a lot of companies do, and have an operation from here to right down to the Indian Ocean?
No, absolutely. I think it is a function of whether doing that is adding value to your customers in terms of your product, or your value proposition. So if you see a lot of cargo moving between these regions, and if there is operational benefit in terms of consolidating with two players to make that happen, or it needs to be financially rewarding to your shareholders. So I think it's one of these two functions that will create this kind of consolidation.
And you recently secured a $25 million loan to pour into your business. Where will that money be going? How will you be funding your growth with it?
So we raised a sizable Series A. I think most of this funds would be focused on the geographies that we are active in and the ones that we are activating now. So Egypt is obviously one of those countries that we're very focused over the next 12 months, and we feel that this time next year we should have a reasonable chunk of the Egyptian trucking business. So this is very focused on Saudi Arabia, the GCC, Egypt, and then we're going to start doing some pilots about countries like Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and these would then form basis of further fundraising in the future. But that's the plan for our Series A.
And what is your biggest cost, and how do you keep hold of that?
So our biggest cost primarily would be operations. It's a trucking operations business, but what I feel is it's also important that you have very strong on-ground operations for this business, because those are the steps towards modernizing or using technology to modernize a lot of processes. So while we do spend a lot on our technology, R&D, and product updates, but I think operations remains heavy, and that's where I think it's going to continue to remain that way. But the way we see the efficiencies and utilizations that can increase, and we've already started seeing it in some markets where margins are improving just as a function of better utilization. We're not increasing our prices to our clients. We're selling at the same kind of levels that we were selling. Obviously, trucking is very seasonal. Trucking in the beginning of the month might be cheaper than at the end of the month, but apple to apple, I think our pricing is not going up, but we're adding to our margins as a function of utilization.
How much competition is there in your business?
From a trucking point of view, I think there is not much conventional competition. Yes, the big players in logistics are all into trucking. But I won't say the market is super, competitive because of smaller players. So the competition is mainly the hundreds of brokers that are there. In technology-based companies that are competing with a similar or identical kind of business model, there are quite a few, and I think it's good for the industry, because we're all trying to do the same thing, educating the driver to use more technology, telling the clients of the benefits of it, or having a lot of team members who now are focused on using technology to modernize their own processes. So, but there's no real competition that is a barrier to growth or anything like that.
What about in Africa? What about this African free trade area? A lot of people are pinning a lot of hopes on it at the moment. How do you think it might change the game for a company like yourself?
To be honest, any region that goes through a free trade agreement where they're opening up borders or making it simpler for goods and services to move between the zones, I think it's good for a logistics kind of business. Because where I said the biggest challenge was documentation, a lot of this documentation is a function of trade barriers. You need to create this document for this customs, or pass through this, pay this duty at this border. So I think, like you see the European Union, moving cargo from France to Hungary is fairly simple. I think that's a function of how open these borders are for trade and services to exchange between them. So yes, any free trade zone would be a great boon to logistics in general.
And as I say, a lot of people who watch the Entrepreneurial Edge are interested themselves in becoming entrepreneurs in particular. What would you say to people watching this? Because they look at you and this guy seems to be sorted with what he's doing, but it wasn't that easy, surely. What would you say to them?
Well, I think we're still getting started. I won't say we are sorted. We are, working hard every day to make sure that we continue to, create a legacy. But I think the most important thing for being an entrepreneur, I feel, is every day people get ideas. You get ideas when you wake up in the morning, you get ideas by watching a television show, you get ideas by watching a film. But I think the difference is how many of us then start, do a bit more work on that idea and then say, okay, I'm going to try this out. And if you do enough work, so I don't think you should be a gambler. But if you feel of an idea, do spend 2 days of researching it, and 2 days is enough to, say, okay, man, let me then make it 2 months. And then the 2 months would be that, okay, now it is a few years. So I think executing, everybody gets ideas, and some of these ideas are great. I get ideas, but for me now it's like, no, I can't work on another idea. I have to spend enough time on this idea. So I think make sure that you guys have the, willingness to go and try it out, spend some time. You don't have to leave your job. I think you can just start researching it. And
where do you think a lot of entrepreneurs, would-be entrepreneurs, fall down in this process, you think?
I think there are challenges around, you need to have a very strong support system. I think my family is that, like both my mom and dad, my wife, they do a lot of sacrifice. They don't see as much of me. I am not there to support very basic things that I used to support earlier. So if you can sort that out very quickly, and if you get your support system in order, I think that's one of the most important things. And then I think if your idea is good and you've created enough traction, then smart money would follow to commercially support your idea and then help you create teams that makes it easier for you. But and the other thing is also, you must have a risk-taking, intrinsic character. I think that's very important. I have always been that. I've risked my pocket money. The first salary I got, I remember I bought stocks with that. So I think you also need to have that in you, that, okay, it's okay if I lose this much amount of money, but I probably, if I don't lose, then I'm probably giving up something that might be much bigger.
And lastly, very briefly, where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? You mentioned you maybe want to get other forms of freight onto the same sort of system. Where do you see yourself ultimately?
Not really. I think from a business point of view, I think trucking is very big, and trucking is a very deep vertical. We can do n number of things just to remaining focused on trucking. So from a trucker point of view, I think we want to make sure that nobody moves cargo on land better than us. So, and then that's a big enough, ambition for us to have right now. For me personally, 10 years is very long. I don't, hopefully I'm still involved in technology-based products and, creating value where technology can disrupt something traditional or less efficient. So, yeah, I don't see myself retiring.
Well, best of luck
in
your venture. That's Gaurav Biswas, the founder and CEO of TruKKer, a company that hails trucks to come and carry freight, and will be doing so in Africa for many years to come. I'm afraid that's all we got time for here in Dubai for this edition of the Entrepreneurial Edge. From me, Chris Bishop, it's goodbye.